Secretary Herman and Assistant Secretary Jeffress, along with all the other program participants, will be available for stand-ups interviews immediately following this announcement. So see Bonnie Friedman, who's right there, to coordinate any of those requests. I'm going to turn the program over to Charles Jeffress, the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health. He's going to provide an overview of the new standard and introduce the other speakers. Again, thank you and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. Today, OSHA is proposing an ergonomics program standard. This standard is intended to protect workers from musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs as they're more commonly known. We are compelled to act. Employees are getting hurt, workers are being sent home, people are suffering. It's time for OSHA to move on. This is the most flexible standard that OSHA has ever proposed. It recognizes that one size does not fit all. It includes options to make it easy for employers to comply. Our bottom line is this: when more than 600,000 American workers have to take time off to recover from MSDs, and over 1 million more experience less serious MSD problems at work, we know that we have a national problem. The good news is we know how to fix these problems, and we know that fixing them will actually save money. This standard will prevent an average of 300,000 work-related MSDs each year, and it will generate $9 billion every year in savings to American employers. Here's how it will work. The primary focus of this proposal is on two types of jobs: production jobs in manufacturing and jobs involving manual lifting, such as moving boxes in a warehouse or lifting patients in a nursing home. We are here focusing because that's where most MSDs occur. In these two areas, employers will have to put a limited ergonomics program in place right away when this standard becomes final. The majority of employers, however, fully 75% of all employers, will be covered only if one of their employees suffers an MSD. That is, 3/4 of employers will have no requirements under this standard unless a documented work-related musculoskeletal disorder occurs in their workplace. That's because injuries are concentrated in manufacturing and manual handling operations. For example, others that will be covered should an injury occur: grocery store worker, cashiers who do the scanning across the checkout counter, individuals doing intensive computer work, keyboard work, people sorting mail. These kinds of jobs will be covered if a musculoskeletal disorder occurs in the workplace. This is how employers with effective ergonomics programs have told us that they handle ergonomics in their workplace. Zero in on the high risks first, and then cover other jobs as problems occur. 3 industries, construction, agriculture, and maritime, are not covered by this proposal today. We will address them at a later time. I mentioned that this is the most flexible standard that OSHA has ever adopted or opposed at this stage. We've given employers many different options: a quick fix to fix problems quickly, a grandfather clause, or perhaps grandparent clause today, extended compliance dates, limited record keeping. Most employers will find the principles involved in these programs simple. If they've already taken steps to address MSDs, they'll be in good shape to meet these requirements. To ensure that employees report MSDs early and catch them before the problems get worse, we've included what we're calling work restriction protection in this proposal. All too often, we've found that employees are reluctant to report their injuries because they fear they will lose their jobs or be put in lower paying positions. With work restriction protection, employees will receive 100% of their pay and benefits if they get transferred to light duty, and 90% of their pay and 100% of their benefits if they have to leave the job because of their injury. If work-related MSDs do occur, employers will need to correct the problem job in which the injury occurred and jobs like it but not all the jobs at the work site, just those jobs where there are problems. OSHA standard is job-based, so employers will only need to fix jobs where injuries have actually occurred. And employers will have two options, a quick fix or a full ergonomics program. Quick fix is a unique aspect of this standard. It's for jobs that can be fixed within 90 days. The solutions are usually simple, they're obvious, relatively inexpensive. If the quick fix fixes the job and there are no reports of further injuries 30 days later, then an employer does not have to implement a full ergonomics program. A full program would be needed for more complex problems. And according to this proposal, the program will have to include 6 steps that each employer with problems will have to address. First, management leadership and employee participation. Second, hazard information and reporting, a reporting mechanism for people to report their problems. Third, job hazard analysis and control, analyze what's causing the problems and fix it. Fourth, training of employees and supervisors and managers in the workplace about ergonomics and what MSD signs and symptoms are and what to look for and how to fix them. Fifth, MSD management, which includes taking care of the injured worker. And sixth, an evaluation of the program. As I mentioned, our proposal also includes a grandfather clause, the first OSHA proposal ever to include a grandfather clause. If employers have effective programs in place today, or if they put them in place in the next year before the effective date of this standard, then they will not have to modify their programs to comply with this standard. We know that ergonomics programs are an effective strategy for reducing MSDs. Extensive scientific research, including from NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, research published 2 years ago, studying 600 different studies that showed ergonomics programs work. From the Government Accounting Office, the U.S. Congress, documenting that ergonomics programs works. And from the National Academy of Sciences, the most respected academic scientific organization in the country today, issued a report last year showing that ergonomics programs work, that there are real solutions to these real problems that people face. The science is in, they prove that ergonomics programs work, our own experience proves that these programs will work, and these programs are the best way to prevent injuries. Our proposal will appear in the Federal Register tomorrow. Copies of the text are available in the packets that you have in front of you, and the full document will be available on our website, www.osha.gov, G-O-V. Written comments on our proposal are due by February 1st, and they may be submitted by email around the country. If people want to participate in the rulemaking, they can send us electronically their comments and their responses. We will have formal public hearings around the country beginning in February. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Guy Fragalla, who is the Director of Environmental Health and Safety at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. And he's here to tell us about the success of the ergonomics program at his medical center and his research. Dr. Fragalla.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here this morning to talk about ergonomics because I've been involved with ergonomics for my entire professional career. I'm very happy to see a lot of attention coming into this area because now my mother finally knows what I do for a living. She used to think I was involved with economics. But there is a lot of value that ergonomic offers, and I've seen a lot of this value at our institution, and I'd like to tell you some of the positives that we've had. Back in the mid-'80s, we began looking at our injury rates and saw that nurses were suffering a lot of back injuries. So we said, what can we do about this? Because the traditional programs we were using, such as teaching people how to lift, really wasn't working. So we began by analyzing jobs. And as we analyzed these jobs, we got a lot of people involved. We involved workers, supervisors, or occupational health people, and we saw certain parts of these jobs that we thought we could change. Some of these changes were relatively simple. For example, when we wanted to get a patient from a bed to a stretcher, we began using sliding boards that reduced friction, and it made it much easier for the nurses to get that patient across to the stretcher, a simple, low-cost solution. We put these programs in place, and we did see a reduction in nursing back injuries. A couple of years later, we expanded our program. We began looking at our workstations throughout the medical center. We had a lot of workstations. We began doing training with employees, teaching them how to analyze problems at their own workstations. They were able to make some simple adjustments. We taught them how to make adjustments, how to set up their workplace. And again, we saw a reduction in injuries, more satisfied employees, higher morale. There was a lot that was gained from that. When we looked at our nursing back injuries in 1996, we found that only a low percentage of our workers' comp dollars were being spent in this area. Further, the medical center has taken this knowledge of ergonomics through our occupational health program. We've worked with a lot of industry in the area through our outreach programs, training employees, working with them on developing programs, and people who have embraced these concepts have seen a lot of success. They've seen a lot of good things happening. So again, there is a lot of value to ergonomics. Right now, my hospital has just entered into a merger with another hospital in the community, and just last week we had a meeting on reducing occupational injuries. It was great to hear people talking about ergonomics, how we're going to use ergonomics to further reduce injuries. Ergonomics has been very important to us at the University of Massachusetts. It will continue to be important. I think ergonomics is going to be very, very important to everyone in American industry. So everyone, let's get excited about ergonomics. There's a lot of good things that can be done with these types of programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Gala. From the experience of someone who's taking a program and making it work in a difficult setting where people are having to do lifting of patients, awkward postures, excessive force, but there are things that can be done, and Dr. Fagala has proven that at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. Next, who has joined us is Walter Frazier. Walt is here to tell us about his own experience with MSDs during 9 years of his work in poultry processing. He knows personally about the damage and the pain that repetitive motion at work can cause, as he's worked at a chicken hanger in the poultry industry. Mr. Frazier.
Good morning to you ladies and gentlemen. My name is Walter Frazier. I'm here to talk to you today about working in the poultry plant and what it can do to a man or a woman. For nearly 9 years, I worked hanging chickens at a poultry plant in Harbison, Delaware. And because of that work, I had many severe injuries to my hand. I'm here to describe to you how we hang these chickens. Before we hang these chickens, they are hauled in from trucks. And the forklift driver takes them off and take the cages and dump them on the conveyor belt. And after that, they'll run onto the belt where we have a foot pedal, which the live hangers hang from. And as we hang these birds, these are shackles that we hang these chicken feet in. And I hang 26 birds a minute into these shackles. And this is an 8-hour workforce each day that I hang these chickens on these shackles. And as I hang these shackles, I have much pain in my hands and in my shoulders from hitting these shackles with my hands. I felt my pains shortly after I began to work at the plant, and over years my pain has gotten worse. I couldn't lift 20 pounds, and I couldn't do many chores at home or even lift my granddaughter. Finally, I did what my doctor said, and at first, I had 3 surgeries to try to fix my damaged hands. I also had back pain and arthritis in my hands and my shoulders. Part of my day, I go to therapy trying to get back my hand movement and strengthen my hands. I'm not able to work as a live hanger anymore. I weigh gizzards. I suffer more than just pain. I lost pay. I was out of work nearly 7 months for my injuries. I can't do my job anymore, and I'm angry about that. And my whole life away from work has been changed, and not for better. I'm a different man today when I went into the chicken plant. I'm not alone. Everyone who's a live hanger at the plant has the same problems. We all have this damaged bodies. We hurt like hell, and we all will. So I speak to the press today that I'm not the same. And I say that hanging these shackles and doing this kind of job is really a hard job. And I say I thank you for me standing up here to speak to you about my injuries, because when I was going through therapy and stuff, I didn't have no hand strength. I didn't have no motion in my hands or movement like I want. So I had to go through a whole lot of therapy to even get the use of my hands that I have now. So I just take the opportunity to stand before you to tell you my story and to speak for all the other line hangers that's going through this same problem right now that I'm going through, and the back pains that I have from this and the shoulder pains that I have from this, doing this such a repetitive job that I'm doing. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you, Walt. Real person, the real problem. And there are real solutions. And the poultry industry is putting some of them in place today. We know that others can do it as well. Our next speaker, Beth Picnic, a registered nurse in settings of lifting patients, moving patients, struggling with patients. She's no longer able to care for patients because of the injuries she's received. A back injury that could have been prevented cut short her career in healthcare nursing. Beth, come tell us your story.
Good morning. I wasn't sure I was going to get here this morning. I took a detour via Virginia. Good morning. My name is Beth Picnic, and I'm a registered nurse and member of the Massachusetts Nurses Association. I'm here today representing the American Nurses Association and the 2.6 million registered nurses in this country to voice our strong support for OSHA's ergonomic standard. I am also here today because while working as an intensive care unit nurse, I suffered a career-ending back injury that was devastating, both personally and professionally. And this injury was preventable. I am determined to make sure that what happened to me does not happen to other healthcare workers. This standard is a step toward that goal. Moving patients from their beds to chairs and vice versa was one of many lifting maneuvers I performed throughout my career. I would twist, bend, pull, and push. It was part of the job. I never had any back problems, but on February 17, 1992, while leaning over a patient to move him, I severely injured my back. I went to physicians, surgeons, and physical therapists determined to get back to work, but I remained in pain. During the 2 years after the injury, I had spinal fusion surgery, which involved major rehabilitation before and after the surgery. I was willing to go through whatever I had to, but my major goal was to get back to the job I loved, which was taking care of critically ill patients and their families. But after the surgery and physical therapy, that still remains possible. I am finally somewhat I can be pain-free, but I have to work hard to remain that way. I cannot stand for long periods of time without support. I can only sit in certain chairs. I cannot lift or do any repetitive bending or twisting motions. Before my injury, I was an active person who enjoyed bicycling, competitive racquetball, water skiing, and yearly whitewater rafting trips with my family, all of which I can no longer do. Due to the injury, I have been relegated to a light-duty job performing tuberculosis surveillance activities for our employee health department. This is not why I became a nurse. I became a nurse to take care of patients. My identity has been based on being a nurse in the intensive care unit. The inability, which I did for 21 years, by the way, the inability to care for patients was devastating and sent me into 4.5 years of clinical depression. My family has had to cope with both my physical and psychological problems. It was horrendous. And 7 years later, I am just beginning to adjust. One of the worst moments in this whole experience was when I learned that my injury could have been prevented. I, like most nurses, assumed that lifting was just part of the job. At the time of my injury, I did not know that there were lifting devices commercially available and that my hospital simply chose not to have them. My hospital is only now starting to implement the use of lifting devices. Healthcare workers continue to face an increasingly hazardous work environment. While caring for others, we put our health and sometimes our lives at risk. This cannot continue. With this standard, healthcare facilities will have to develop back injury prevention programs that will involve frontline healthcare workers. Engineering controls like lifting devices must be the primary means of prevention. Single-person lifts without assistive staff or devices should be eliminated, which means hospitals will have to ensure adequate staffing. By protecting workers from injury, healthcare facilities can also invest in retaining a cadre of experienced, healthy nurses, which is particularly important in this time of increasing nursing shortages. If this standard had been in place in 1992, I would still be living the active life that I love. I would be able to stand and have a conversation without pain. I would still be doing what I love, taking care of my patients. Thank you. Okay, now I would like to introduce a true champion of workers, someone who understands the hopes and fears of working people, someone who cares deeply about their pain, someone who is committed to preserving their health, someone who is tireless in her support for working men and women. Alexis Herman, Secretary of Labor.
Good morning. First of all, let me thank you, Beth Picnic, for your introduction, but we want to thank both you and Walter Frazier for being with us today. But I especially want to thank you today for sharing your stories and for having the courage to come forward. While we cannot undo the pain that you have suffered, we can certainly take steps, and we are doing just that here today, to prevent others from experiencing the same types of injuries, the injuries that have so radically and dramatically changed your lives. Certainly ensuring healthy and safe workplaces is one of my top priorities as Secretary of Labor. And indeed, for me, developing an ergo standard has been at the top of that list. I first came to develop an understanding and an appreciation for this issue literally more than 20 years ago, when I first came to the Department of Labor as the director of the Women's Bureau. And I had, as a part of that experience, the opportunity to travel to the state of Mississippi and to see firsthand for myself women primarily who were working in poultry facilities. I saw firsthand, as I had as a social worker, their hands that were maimed, fingers cutting off, the inability to have any motion at all. And I can remember being asked then, isn't there something that we can do about this? Well, today, we are answering that question because the fact of the matter is, work-related musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs as they are most commonly called, are the most prevalent, the most expensive, and the most preventable workplace injuries in the country. And it is time that we did something about them. Although most employers take seriously their obligations to maintain healthy workplaces, when employees are hurt on the job, employers have a responsibility to act. And this is why the proposed ergonomic standard isn't just about another rule or another regulation. It is about helping real people suffering from real problems, problems like back injuries and carpal tunnel syndrome, tendinitis, not minor aches or pains, but serious, life-altering injuries. There are more than 100 medically recognized MSDs today. And each day in the workplace, more than 4,900 Americans will experience one of these injuries. And more than 1,600 of them will have to stay home to recover. And almost 4,000 Americans will miss work today due to potentially painfully disabling MSDs. More than 1/3 of the most critical on-the-job injuries are the result of overexertion or repetitive motion. And because many women work in the jobs where these kinds of injuries occur, jobs like nurses' aides, cashiers, and garment workers, poultry workers, the issue of MSDs in particular holds special relevance for women. MSDs are painful to workers and costly to employers. But as Dr. Fagala has so ably demonstrated here today, and we thank you for being with us today, Dr. Fagala, and for reminding us that there are solutions. And many of them are used today across the country by employers who have successful ergonomics programs. And these programs not only benefit their employees, but they also benefit their respective bottom lines. The principles of prevention are simple and easy to put in practice. Reduce physical force, decrease repetitive motion, using lifting devices or reducing loads. These ergonomic standards that we are proposing today truly are focused especially on high-risk jobs in general industry where solutions are well understood, as Charles Jeffress has already pointed out to us. And this proposed standard is flexible, and that is important because we recognize that this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It reflects the best practices in the industry today, and it clearly offers a framework for employers to adopt well-accepted principles to fit their specific workplaces. Today, we begin a long-awaited process of protecting workers from these disabling disorders. My friends, this is the right thing to do. This is the smart thing to do, because good ergonomics is also good economics. I look forward in the weeks and months ahead to consulting with the many stakeholders that we will listen to as a part of this process as we propose now to develop the final standard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Herman. Thank you, Dr. Fagala. Thank you, Mr. Frazier, Ms. Pickwick. Thank you for being with us. We'll now take questions for any of the participants in the press conference or for myself, questions that you may have. Yes, sir.
Madam Secretary, in regard to repetitive strain injuries, for example, if there is some sort of predisposition toward this injury, in other words, if just a few people on an assembly line or using computer keyboards suffer this injury as opposed to the majority of individuals, why isn't it the responsibility of that employee to find another line of work rather than the responsibility of the employer to change the structure of the job or the system to accommodate those individuals?
Well, the operating principle here is a recognition that if the job itself is a job that is causing some type of a physical injury in the workplace, then we believe that the employer has a responsibility to adjust that job. That is what the principle is. And that is why, as Charles explained earlier, if an employer happens to come across a situation such as you described, we believe that the quick fix principle could be put into place, that they could take the necessary actions to prevent whatever the occurrence may be. But we don't see this as the responsibility of an employee to go and find another job. The goal here is to have workplaces that are safe and healthy for workers to work in today. That means all workplaces. And we believe that we have a responsibility to work with employers and employees alike to bring that into being.
Madam Secretary, you've given us some very clear-cut examples of serious problems in some workplace environments. But in the office where it's not so clear-cut, how will employers be able to determine, for example, if it's the use of the keyboard that is causing the problem or the fact that that person goes home at night and does needlepoint or crochet, and there might be other causes that would cause these problems.
Well, that's a part of why we think that you have to have management leadership and provide a process to determine what is causing that injury. Unfortunately, what has happened in the past is there has been no forum, no opportunity, no process to determine precisely what is causing the injury. And what we want to do now is to provide a way for that to occur in workplaces today. Charles would like to add to that.
And if I might add to that, the obligation an employer currently has today is to determine whether injuries that occur in the workplace are job-related. It's currently a requirement, has been a requirement ever since workers' compensation came into being. That continues, and this standard does not change that. So if the injury is work-related, it's covered. If it occurred outside the workplace, it is not covered. And there are lots of demonstrations of lowering keyboard trays, changing the location of mouse, giving chairs that can improve the workstation for computer users. Yes, sir.
When would you hope that this might be a done deal?
End of next year.
I expect this to be a done deal by the end of next year. Our goal is to use the year 2000 to have the appropriate outreach and consultation with the necessary stakeholders. We're proposing, for instance, 3 hearings that will take place next year. We will take all of the comments and hopefully be ready for final rulemaking at the end of the year.
The business community might perceive this as a classic example of an unfunded mandate, and in fact the Small Business Administration is said to believe that this will cost $18 billion to employers. What are your cost estimates, and what can the government do to help business deflect the cost of these improvements?
Our cost estimates is that it will cost approximately $4.1 billion in terms of the total cost to implement. We also estimate that that's because of the savings that we envision that will occur as a result of the implementation. I should say the total cost is $9 billion, but the savings puts it at $4.1 billion in terms of the reduction in direct costs to employers. We also know that in terms of workers' compensation costs today, that cost is anywhere from $15 to $20 billion in terms of what it presently already costs us each year to deal with MSD disorders, of which there are approximately 1/3 of all workers' compensation costs today.
Is there any proposal for tax relief to accompany these improvements? I mean, for businesses to be able to take some kind of a break because of the improvements that they have now, they will ultimately be ordered by the government to institute?
We do not certainly have any proposals at this point to put in place any kind of tax offset, if you will, with regard. We believe that the savings, quite frankly, from implementing this standard will ultimately be a good return on investment, not just in terms of the tax dollars that we're already putting into programs, quite frankly, like the workers' compensation program, but we also have evidence from employers who've already implemented these kinds of programs in their work sites who tell us that it has led to cost reductions in many work sites for them from 20% to some as high as 70%. So it does directly impact the bottom line for employers as well.
Any projections on how this is going to affect productivity?
I'll respond, and then Charles, you can also respond. Yes, we have very good examples as we have talked with employers who have been involved in this issue for many years, that it does increase productivity in the workplaces, because it stands to reason that when workers are healthier and able to perform their duties without pain and discomfort, that the return on investment in terms of just greater productivity is an obvious outcome.
I would just add to that by pointing out that in your package you have stories from companies in a lot of different industries, healthcare, meatpacking, automobile assembly, electronics, where when they put ergonomics programs in place, because of the increased health of the worker, there is increased productivity. I know the fear that's being driven out there is that, oh, this is going to require big fixes, this is going to require slowdown of lines. That is not the experience of real workers and real employers, that in fact their productivity increases.
I'm going to ask Dr. Fagala if he would also speak to that, because he is clearly someone who has been on the front lines of this issue, examining those issues specifically.
Okay, one thing to consider is where ergonomics had its roots. Ergonomics was born to increase productivity. If you look at what was done in ergonomics, the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, the main intent was to increase productivity. So as I said, there's a lot of value to be gained from ergonomics because we make the worker healthier, more comfortable, more satisfied, and I believe we will increase productivity. And then when we talk about costs, we've talked about the direct costs, the medical payments and compensation. There are many, many indirect costs associated with occupational injuries that we haven't even begun to tap and to quantify, and I think those are further benefits we can achieve from these types of programs.
Aspect of this proposal, and are you encouraging companies to get grandfathered, if you will, to try to sort of avoid some of what's going on in the end?
We definitely are encouraging employers to be grandfathered, grandmothered in. The fact of the matter is there are good programs that are there. And, you know, I say if it ain't broke, we don't want to fix it. And so we want to encourage employers to take advantage of that clause. Charles, you may want to speak more directly to that from a process standpoint of view.
The grandfather clause is specifically written to encourage people to do it today or do it tomorrow, to get their programs in place right away, not wait for the standard to take effect. Programs that have the basic elements of an ergonomics program and that are effective that employers have in place today will not have to be changed to meet the requirements of this proposal.
I have a follow-up on that. If you have the grandfather program and then you have a reportable documented MSD injury, would you then have to go to a full ergonomics program, or could you stay with that grandfathered one?
The grandfather program will have the basic elements in it of this standard. So even if there are subsequent MSDs, if you have an effective program that is working, then you can keep that program. An effective program, it does not necessarily mean no MSDs occur. We know that effective programs can be effective, substantially reduce what is occurring without getting to zero injuries. All of our goal is to get to zero injuries, but that's not the test of an effective program.
With respect to the numbers, you seem to sort of fudge the numbers there a little bit. You said that it was going to cost $4.2 billion, but that included the savings, you said, of $5 billion?
The actual cost is roughly 9.
That's the benefits. The 9.1 is the benefits. 4.2 is the cost.
4.2 of the cost.
Right.
Can you walk us through the numbers and how you get from a cost of $4 billion to a savings of $9 billion? Can you just walk us through some of the major?
Yeah. If I can do that, the $4.2 billion in cost is what we expect industry to be investing to accommodate this ergonomics program standard. Of that $4.2 billion, $900 million of that, almost $1 billion of that, is to repay employees the wages and benefits that they're losing when they are off the job today. So that's actually money that employees are already spending, but their employees are having to spend it. We expect that that part of the cost now will be picked up by employers if this standard becomes final. So the total is $4.2 billion of investment we expect employers to make. When they make that investment, that's an annual cost. When we make that investment, we expect an annual savings to employers as a result of reduced workers' compensation costs, reduced medical payments costs, increased productivity. We expect a savings to employers of $9.1 billion. So that's the crosswalk between these two.
And net is $9 billion net, or is that?
No, the $9 billion is not net. The $9.1 billion is the savings. There's a $4.2 billion in costs. Since there'll be some people invest more money than others, some get more benefits than others, we're not netting that out. But the
4.2 is an annual cost, right?
That's correct. 4.2 is an annual cost. Yes, sir.
Jeffress, I wonder if you could clarify. You yourself a moment ago alluded to the height of a keyboard. I'm sure you saw the photograph in the Post today provided by OSHA of a keyboard. But you've provided good examples here of these two individuals who suffered non-so-called white-collar injuries. And in your listing, you talk about manual handling jobs. You talk about manufacturing jobs. To what degree is this focused on the use of computer keyboards and mice?
This is not Sorry. This is not focused on mice or mouses or anything else. In general industry today, 60% of all of our MSDs occur in manufacturing operations or where manual lifting is involved. So that's where the bulk of our injuries are occurring, in manufacturing and in manual lifting. There are injuries that are occurring in keyboarding as well. And where those injuries occur, this standard will be triggered and will provide protection. But even though only 28% of the people in the workforce work in manufacturing and manual lifting, that's where 60% of these occur. That's why in these two areas, employers will have to be proactive and put a limited program in place even before someone gets hurt, because we know that's where most of them occur.
And if I could just, I want to recognize one person who's had their hand up for a long time, but before doing that, the other thing that I think is relevant here is that the 60% that Charles is speaking of is the existing profile as we know it today. But as we talk about the workplace of the future, as we look at the impact of technology and computers going into the workforce of the future, we know that this is an issue that we would expect to see increasing reports on. Today it is about 15%, for instance, of workers' compensation costs are related to carpal tunnel syndrome, for instance. That is a new feature, if you will, as we look at new areas that are coming into our workers' comp program. I believe that by getting in front of this issue, in particular now with this standard, that it will actually help us more on the preventive side in areas where computer work in particular is going to become more and more important. And the more that we can talk about solutions in this area, I think it is going to be more broadly beneficial to American workers. So I think it's a big preventive issue for computers.
Madam Secretary, much of this proposal was announced in February. Can you describe any changes that have been made this year up to now, perhaps with an eye to selling this to the business community? I mean, what's different now than in February?
I will ask Charles to speak more directly to it, but I can tell you that we have been listening very actively to employers on this issue, and we have incorporated many of the concerns that we've heard. For instance, the Quick Fix program came out of that consultation process since February. Many of the issues, as we've looked at how we grandmother in other employers, what's in that program that allows for that. These are the kinds of issues. As we've explored more cost proposals and what's working and what's not working to get a better handle on cost estimates, all of these issues have been a part of the consultation process since February. Charles?
That's right. As the Secretary mentioned, the Quick Fix is the biggest change since February, allowing employers to simply and quickly fix jobs without putting full programs in place. Some other modifications we made after hearing from small business folks, we reduced the amount of work restriction protection payments that have to be made to 90% of wages. We changed the economic estimates, the cost estimates, based on what people told us. We put in a different way of determining, are you in compliance? You don't have to eliminate every MSD, but you have to have a significant reduction in MSDs and a way of making incremental changes so that you put one change in place. If that works, you don't have to put any of the others in place that might also work. So we have made a number of changes following the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Panel in February.
Last question.
Last question, yes, Dan.
Could you elaborate on what an objective MSD sign is and to what degree you can rely on third parties to verify that?
Could you say that a little louder?
Yeah. It says in here, when an employee, it's a recordable MSD when an employee reports an objective MSD sign, or when it's one of many things that can trigger a reportable and therefore a requirement for a basic program or a quick fix. And I'm wondering how you determine what is an objective. Is it if just an employee says, I've got a pain in my hand?
No, there's certain signs that are very visible, if you will, very tangible. You can't grip something. If you cannot move your hand in a certain way. There are certain physical characteristics here that we have labeled as objective signs, but with regard to the second part of the question, and maybe to elaborate further on that, Charles, if you could respond.
Yes, and in the definitions section of this proposal, signs are laid out that, as the Secretary said, loss of motion, inability to grip. Other signs are laid out, as are symptoms that are required. And obviously the signs are easy to see generally if someone is unable to grip or has lost the motion in their hand. The referral to the healthcare practitioner is required by the employer if the employer believes that there needs to be some medical follow-up on this employee. And if the healthcare practitioner makes a diagnosis and a recommendation, the employer is obligated to follow that recommendation.
Mr. Jeffress, a question in the back, please. Just to give us an idea of the range and of this standard and the required employer response, suppose that Mike Musina or David Cohen report a rotator cuff injury to Mr. Angelos or Mr. Steinbrenner. What in that case, and I see that it's not an agriculture or maritime or any of the three excluded industries, what in that case are Mr. Angelos and Mr. Steinbrenner required to do?
You know, I've already had to address this once. Some of you may know that I ran the state OSHA program in North Carolina before I came to Washington to help Secretary Herman with this program. And we targeted employers by where the highest rate of injuries was occurring. So we looked at all the workers' compensation claims in North Carolina, and lo and behold, the Carolina Mudcats baseball team came up relatively high on the list. Well, we went out to visit Carolina Mudcats, and they pointed out that those folks running around the bases were independent contractors and not employees, not covered by the OSHA Act. So we said fine and moved on. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you very much.